Shalom, Chaverim, and welcome to another session of Soulful Psalms. I'm noticing that my face is a little deeply cast, a little bit like, I don't know, a sting in every breath you take. And that is directly the result of the fact that I'm recording in the evening and it's dark outside. So admire the dramatic highlights of my forehead, the various crags and things like that, or ignore them. So uh, I'm going to talk about actually three Psalms because I want to focus on not so soulful technical issue, a feature of the Psalms or many Psalms, though I will draw attention to some particularly interesting things. So talking about last time we talked about Psalm 15, which I think is a really, really magnificent psalm. I'm going to get off of that a little bit. We're talking about Psalm 16, 17, and 18. And the sort of tent peg business, the technical issue I want to talk about are superscriptions. Now, a superscription in our terms is something like a footnote letter or something like that. But in this particular case, superscriptions are little headers that appear at the top of a given psalm. And they have a number of complexities associated with them. So I'm going to share them with you as we go. All right. So on Psalm 16, if you go to the very top of Psalm 16, technically the first verse reads, Miktam le David. All right, so a Miktam of David. What the heck is a Miktam? Well, we don't know for certain, but likely it's some kind of musical mode or style. So if you could imagine, if you were saying, this Psalm of David should be performed in Delta blues, right? So the choir leader, when doing Psalm 16, would go, all right, a 1 and a 2 and a 3, bum bum ba da bum 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 ba da da bum 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 bum. Protect me, O Lord, bum 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 bum, for I seek refuge in you. Bum bum, like that. So that's probably a musical notation that doesn't mean a great deal to us anymore. Maybe the time will come, additional texts will emerge or sources that will help us understand exactly what this reference is for, but I'm kind of doubting it. So we could assign meaning to a miktam or to any of the other shigiga or any other term that appears like this. Suffice to say, I think it's a musical cue, and I think there's pretty much consensus on that. If we look at Psalm 17 and its superscription, it simply says Tefillah David. And tefillah is a word we should be familiar with. It means prayer. Now, why is it a prayer when it's something else under another psalm? Is that telling us something else about the way it's performed? We don't know. So what I'm going to focus on is the other feature, which was also a feature of Psalm 16, Le David. So Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, all insist that the Psalms are the work of David, that he created them. And so you will often see, including in our Jewish translation, that La David is translated as of David, suggesting David wrote it. The problem with that is that Le David doesn't mean of David. It's la is a preposition, to or towards or for. So the most logical interpretation of is this is a prayer for David. We like to think that David is the sweet singer of Israel, the composer, the warrior poet, etc., etc., etc. More than likely, as a king, these things were composed for him on his behalf, dedicated to him, something like that. And in any case, only about 70 plus of the 150 Psalms is specifically Le David. So you can't even, under any circumstances, claim that all of the Psalms were known to David, were sung by David or towards David. This is a collection of poetry that may well extend to a millennium, 1,000 years, and that the different layers of poems exist. Some of them contemporary, I can say this, contemporaneous to David, but many of them not. So just understand how tradition tends to smooth out bumpy features of documents, texts, sacred scriptures that we see. To David, we speak of the Psalms of David, but I think you should take that with a grain of malacha, of salt. So we have the Miktam of David, we have a prayer for David, etc., etc. But then, if we go over to Psalm 18, we get something way more elaborate. All right. And it starts out speaking to the leader. And here the law is translated as for or to. So it's directed to some kind of choir director or somebody or something else. And then it gets darn explanatory. So it says, of David, the servant of the Lord, who addressed the words of this song to the Lord after the Lord saved him from the hands of all of his enemies and from the clutches of Saul. He said, and now we get to the actual psalm. All right. It's what we would describe as I alluded to it earlier, a footnote, some kind of explanatory note that marks the occasion in which David supposedly, I'm going to say supposedly, composed this psalm. And in fact, you run into quite a number of these throughout the Psalms, where there is an attempt to link this particular poem to events in David's life. And this reflects the ancient belief that David did compose these, and therefore he must have had an occasion to compose them. And this particular one, this is understood to be a reference to the early life of David. He composed this after he was spared potential death because Saul saw him as a traitor and hunted him down, etc. And in fact, in point of fact, this psalm, Psalm 18, is actually repeated elsewhere in the Bible. It appears in 2 Samuel 22, and it is the psalm that David recites after the death of Saul and Jonathan at the hands of the Philistines. So, clearly, it was it originally part of the book of Samuel, an account of David's life, and then it was added to the Psalms? Or was it a psalm that seemed to fit into a moment in David's life that was then embedded in the narrative of the book of Samuel? We cannot know for sure. We do know that it's not completely consistent with the poem that David recites in 2 Samuel 22. Easily the result of either oral memory, writing it from memory. You can write most of the lyrics of a song, but occasionally you get it wrong, or scribal error. And whether that error is here in the Psalms or whether it's there in 2 Samuel, we cannot say. But it gives you a sense of how these Psalms were read and understood as having a particular historicity, a particular historical occasion in which some of them are at least identified as being composed. We cannot say with any certainty that this is the work of David, that David composed it at the moment that Saul died, or any of these things. And we can't say which came first. Mysteries of the Bible that cannot be resolved. And believe me, scholars have spilled an awful lot of ink trying to say, oh, this is the original version. No, this is the original version. And on it goes. Suffice for us to simply take interest in its content. So I'm going to stop here with this whole technical problem of superscriptions. And I do want to draw attention to a couple of features that I think move us towards the soulful. So particularly in Psalm 16, it's a long psalm. It's not always used complete from beginning to end. And in point of fact, we sometimes are not sure that a psalm is one poem. Maybe it was originally two poems that in the process of being copied, they sort of merge together. They sometimes have different changes of focus and mode and person and things. Classically, the 23rd Psalm is an example of that. We start out with this uncanny pastoral image of God as my shepherd, and the next thing you know, we're sitting in the face of our enemies, like we're at a table staring down at Darth Vader, and then we're back again in the valley of the shadow, and they fit together on a certain level, but it certainly is a zig and a zag in terms of the imagery that's going on. So a lot of the longer Psalms may, in fact, be two Psalms or more. We don't know for sure. But in any case, with 16, what happens is that Jewish tradition has really extracted out a couple of key passages that it uses over and over again. And the most famous of these is the verse known as Shviti. A verse taken out is called a lectionary. And oftentimes they're combined with verses from other Psalms, creating a composite composition. Matovu is actually an example of a composite composition. But the Shviti is really significant because it becomes a symbol of divine protection and reassurance. Let me read it for you and translate it for you, and then I'll tell you how it's been used in Jewish tradition. It is Shviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimami bal emot. All right, and I am ever mindful of God's presence. He is my right hand. I will never be shaken. All right, so the simple one verse statement becomes a declaration of Jewish confidence and sometimes hope, and actually becomes rendered as a almost a talisman or a amulet. That phrase is often put onto some kind of document with words of Jewish comfort on them. It's mounted on the wall. It is a constant reminder that God is present in this moment. Now, I'm going to try in a very awkward way to move the camera here, and I'm going to draw your attention to a picture, actually a work of graphic art with letters that includes the Shviti, and whoop, up, there it is, and of course there's a giant glare on it. But in any case, if you can see it, if I raise it enough, maybe you can get a sense of it. That is a Shviti plaque. And you can see that the psalm has been converted into a visual image, in this particular case, a menorah. But it starts out, Shviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, the exact verse that appears in Psalm 16. And this becomes so significant in Jewish art forms and Jewish things that you'll find it all over the place. Oftentimes, if you're looking at a random decorative object, an ornament or a picture or a amulet. In Israel, if you're in the shuk and you're looking at something, it's the shviti. And so this idea that we remind ourselves that God, we are always in the presence of God, is has taken on a special meaning that some verses become more important than others, like Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That ranks way higher than a lot of other verses in the Bible, and the same thing is true of this particular verse from Psalm 16. But now I want to take you to show you kind of how, while the superscription attempts to assign a historic occasion to this particular thing. In this particular case, God delivers David from the danger of a king who's seeking to destroy him. And in fact, you can see underneath it all a different story. So if we were to go all the way through 18, which is a very long psalm, and we pick up at 14, we would hear, "Then the Lord thundered from heaven, the Most High gave forth his voice, hail and fiery coals. He let fly his shafts and scattered them. He discharged lightning and routed them. The ocean bed was exposed. The foundations of the world were laid bare. By your mighty roaring, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils, you reached down from on high. He took me. He drew me out of the mighty waters. He saved me from my fierce enemy, from foes too strong for me. They confronted me on the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out to freedom. He rescued me because he was pleased with me." Now, there's a lot going on in there. We've talked earlier about the idea of the image of God as a divine warrior, and clearly that is there when he's letting loose his shafts of arrows to defeat Israel's enemies. That's a clear indication that it's divine warrior. But if you listen to all the little elements of it, hail and fiery coals, discharging lightning, the ocean bed was exposed, the foundations of the world were laid bare. By your mighty roaring, the blast of the breath of your nostrils, you reached down on high and you took me. You drew me out of the mighty waters. You saved me from my fierce enemy. Does that suggest anything to you? I mean, for me, and I think for a lot of commentators, it sounds like crossing of the Sea of Reeds. God intervening to rescue Israel as the mighty foe, who was Egypt, was pursuing them, right? They confronted me on the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out to freedom. He rescued me because he was pleased with me. So is this a psalm directed at a moment in David's life? Or is this a psalm that is artistically speaking about a moment in our sacred history where the entire people were redeemed because God miraculously intervened. I can't say for sure, but this, I think, is clearly meant to be a poetic version of Exodus 14 and 15, where God saves the Israelites by splitting the sea, right down to the what is the term they use? The foundations of the world were laid bare. We get across there, and then with the breath of his mouth, sweeps away our enemies. Uh, Complex, uh, hard to sort of place it. And why do we have to have two different ideas about this one psalm? It is the nature of Jewish spirituality that it is compounded, that layers upon layers of our experience come to be marked and illustrated by our scripture. I like to read this psalm as a message of a God who loves us and wants us to have freedom and is willing to come to our aid. You may prefer the individual message. Like David, God will be there for you and help you overcome all the threats and enemies and obstacles that you face individually. You can read it both ways, and that's why it works. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll move on to the next psalm. But I just want to call your attention to all these ramified, collective, individual ideas, and they're all mashed together. So it actually makes the Psalms more useful than they might otherwise be. Evening, and I look forward to doing the next one.